Okay, we'll get started now. This webinar is on the status of the Scalable AWP Committee update. So we've been working on, Steve, yeah, there we go. Sorry, there's a slight delay there. So when COAA first got involved in trying to improve how projects were planned and executed, they developed something called work phase planning. And basically what that involved was building small packages called installation work packages, where the contractor could make sure they had all the material, the equipment necessary to execute that work. The primary focus was on the contractor and not so much on the engineers or the procurement function. It definitely improved productivity, but in order to get the gains that we've been hoping to achieve, we needed to start focusing on the front end. By looking at the front end, we could start to say, well, how we package the work, getting the engineers involved, getting the procurement folks involved, getting the constructor involved, determining how we were going to build the project, and then packaging it to support that, and having the packages fully constraint satisfied was going to give us much better results. Now, work phase planning is really focused on the contractor in the field. Front end planning is focused on all the parties getting ready. And when you put the two together, then you have advanced work packaging. And I'm experiencing a little bit of a delay here, so I apologize. So those two together is what gives us advanced work packaging. And as a result, we've been able to see some pretty impressive benefits. AWP works on mega projects. We've been able to see significant benefits as a result of applying it to projects all over the world. Also, it works on multiple industries. So it started off in oil and gas, but we're seeing it being used in the chemical industry, the power industry, and to great result. The one thing that it wasn't designed to do was to work on non-mega projects, on scalable, smaller projects. Now, it has been used to some success, but because it wasn't really designed for those type of projects, the success is not as great as it could be. So what kind of benefits can we see from the use of advanced work packaging? There was a study done by the University of Texas at Austin that showed that there could be labor productivity improvements of 25%. There could be cost reductions of 10% of total installed cost. We have a number of projects where there have actually been no recordable safety incidents. And when you're doing millions of hours worth of building and you have no safety incidents, that's pretty impressive. We've also seen that there's been better schedule attainment. We've seen that in some cases rework has been reduced to close to zero. And one of the impressive benefits is that we're seeing a lot of predictability improvements. So when we say something's going to happen, it actually does. Now that's for advanced work packaging on larger projects. Why do we need scalable AWP? Well, I mean, for one thing, most projects are actually smaller in nature. Mega projects are not the majority of projects we do, but we have seen that the bigger projects give us, generally speaking, bigger challenges, and advanced work packaging works on those projects. It it gets better results, and it has been expanded now. Initially, the model was set up to work for the oil and gas projects, but there's been a conscious attempt to broaden it to other industries and other parts of the world. And what we found is that making the model scalable was never part of the original mandate. But industry has been requesting, isn't there some way you can take advanced work packaging and apply it to smaller projects? So as a result, we've had a team assembled to do that. And I just want to use the golfer analogy for 1 second. When you think of bigger projects, they tend to have major projects groups, they tend to have a lot of formalized processes, they have specialists working in them. But when we look at smaller projects, they tend to be run by site, and often they're not run exactly the same way each time. So I'm a non-golfer, but my understanding is that when it comes to golf, a bad golfer that's consistent is easier to coach to a higher level of performance than a bad golfer that's inconsistent. If I'm doing it the same way every time, it becomes easier to optimize my performance. If I'm doing it differently every time, it becomes very hard for me to improve my performance. And advanced work packaging initially was focused on, let's try and improve a project. But what we're seeing is more and more owner companies want to improve their portfolio of projects. They don't want to just make one project a success. They want to take what they've learned and apply it to all the projects they do. And they want to have more consistency, more standardization with the goal of optimizing their performance. We're using the concepts of advanced work packaging to try and do that. So what's our mandate? Our mandate is to improve performance on smaller projects. Now, by smaller projects, we mean 100 million and under. So it could be used on quite small projects all the way up to 100 million. And we're doing this by using advanced work packaging principles. So when you think about it, if we do this and we get the same results we're getting on big projects, we're going to see productivity improve, we're going to see cost reduced, we're going to see safety improved, we're going to see the set schedule performance improve, we're going to see rework decline, and we're going to see predictability improve. And those are some pretty good objectives to go after. But it's not a matter of us just taking the model and applying it to smaller projects. We have to make some adjustments. So the first assumption that we have is that the advanced work packaging model is the best practice for executing construction projects, both how they're planned and how they're executed. There's been a lot of years of research that have gone into this, and we've seen that the outcomes have been extremely impressive. But some new ideas, one is that the project can be categorized into types, and that how those types are managed will differ. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, but categorization of types is a new concept. The next thing is that by using a systematic data-based approach, we're going to improve project outcomes on these smaller projects. And the next point is that while the principles of AWP, and I'm going to introduce those soon, don't change, the practices need to be modified based on the size of the project, complexity, how familiar the organization is with that project. So we've structured ourselves with a series of committees. I'm Lloyd Rankin. I'm the chair of the steering committee, and the individuals listed here, Jeremy Furzer is the chair of the owners working committee, Randy Friesen is the chair of the Engineering and Supply Chain Working Committee. Kirk Harris is the chair of the Front-End Construction Committee, and Ben Swan is the chair of the Work Phase Planning Committee. But we have over 40 professionals on our teams. These are professional engineers, professional constructors, supply chain specialists, owners, and they're not just coming from Canada, but they're also coming from the United States. So we have, I would call it the dream team, pulling together this model, and they've been working tirelessly on this for months now. Our approach is that we're first going to articulate the AWP principles, and we have done that, and we're 100% complete on that. Secondly, we're going to develop a classification scheme based on familiarity and risk, and again, we're 100% done on that. We're also going to determine the appropriate project management strategy for each type of project, and we're 100% complete on that work. We're taking the integrated lifecycle flowchart that was developed in RT 272, and we're determining what the key activities are to plan a construction project that fits into the scalable model, and that's 100% complete. And then we're developing examples for each project type with supporting documentation, and we're about 50% complete on that. And then we're putting together an interactive report that's going to be released at the COAA Best Practices. Now, originally our intent was that we were going to have this report ready for Houston, but instead what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sending the draft report covering all of the different types of projects out to people from Houston, as well as to the community of practice at CII, and we're going to give them about a month and a half to review what we've come up with, and then it'll be presented formally at the Best Practice Conference in Edmonton. And we're going to be starting to write that report right after this conference is complete. So I'm going to pass it over to Ben Swan, and he'll walk you through the rest of the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of you in person in Houston in a few weeks. One of the key shifts required to move the current AWP model to a scalable model for projects under the 100 million threshold was applying a paradigm shift in how we look at the model through principles and practices. I like to think that principles are timeless and practices are timely. Another way to look at the difference between them is to see the principles as the what we do and the practices of how we do it. And as Lloyd says, we've settled on the 7 principles. The first one being is that we always determine how we're going to build a project, typically referred to as the path of construction. Second principle is that we will always determine how to package the project and manage those packages. 3, we'll identify and supply the necessary information to build the project. From that information, we'll always identify and supply the necessary materials required to build the project. That material is going to require equipment, and we always identify and supply the necessary equipment and tools to install the material. 6, we identify and supply the necessary skilled and quantity labor requirements to build the project. And 7, we ensure all requirements are satisfied prior to execution or releasing of the work throughout the AWP process. And so, as we move into looking at the practices, let's look at 2 vastly different projects and walk through the same list of principles. And what we'll see is that the principles don't change, but the practices of how we do them is vastly different. So principle number 1. We always determine how we're going to build a project. We have a very intense process in determining how we're going to build a mega project through the AWP model. But as simple as building a fence may be, we still determine how we're going to build it, from securing the posts, the framing rails, the pickets, the gates, and even where we're going to start. So we'll see that the practice is very different, and yet the principle is the same. Principle number 2 is we determine how to package the project and manage the packages. On our mega projects, we'll find a 3D model, a vendor like Aviva, Bentley, or Intergraph that helps the process of packaging the work out through EWPs to CWPs to IWPs. The practice of how we do it on a fence build may be as simple as a layout package with an installation package for detail and giving instructions on how to build the fence. This can be simply accomplished through a simple Excel workbook. Again, the practice is vastly different, but the principle of what we're doing is the same. Principle number 3 is identify and supply the necessary information. And on mega projects, we provide the information in the form of a 3D model with drawings, specifications, standards, vendor documentation, and standard installation details. On our fence project, we'll have a general layout showing the location of the posts and gates and some installation details showing the dimensions on how to build the different parts of the fence at a bare minimum to be able to provide that information. We move on to principle number 4, where we always identify and supply the necessary materials. On mega projects, we have bill of materials for owners, engineers, contractors, and procurement work packages. We have companies like Atlas RFID that help manage the material on the sites. But on our fence, we'll identify the type of material. We might go treated or untreated, stained or painted, spruce or cedar, the size of post dimensions of both the framing and the pickets, and whether we create a list in Excel or simply on the back of a cigarette package, we still identify the required material to purchase to be able to build the project. Principle number 5 is that we identify and supply the necessary equipment. And on our mega projects, we find that we've got entire groups that assist us from lift studies of installing major equipment to equipment required to complete a cable pull. Where on our fence project, we'll identify the equipment to either pound or to drill the posts. And then are we going to be using screw guns or nail guns? Do we have power? Do we need a generator? Do we need a compressor? All of that equipment will be identified prior to moving on to bringing a crew on to start the work. Principle 6 is we identify and supply the necessary labor requirements. On mega projects, we have labor relations and trade union negotiations to ensure that the right labor in quantity and quality is there to build the project. And on our fence project, we'll be scheduling for when our kids are going to be home to ensure that we have the necessary slave labor to get the job done. That's a joke for the kids, for those out there that have teenage kids like myself. Principle number 7 is we ensure all requirements are satisfied prior to execution. On our mega project, we have a formalized review sign-off process that ensures our IWPs issued to the field are constraint-free. And on our fence project, it could be a simple spreadsheet that we manage our work fronts with. And so as we see, the principles are always the same, but the practices change vastly determining on the size and location of the project. In the early stages of developing the scalable model, Lloyd uncovered the idea of project categorization, which has not only added value to the structure of the model, but also increased the clarity of the model. We then created sample projects that fit into each of the categories for which to run the model through as it's developed. The Type 1 solar project has a price tag of $30 million. And on the low end of this type of project, the valve replacement has a price tag of $2 million. The Type 2 category that we've chosen is a single cycle power plant with a price tag of $60 million. And the Type 3 is a debottlenecking project with a price tag of $80 million. So let's look at the Type 1 project. Type 1 projects are familiar to the enterprise. They all carry a low risk in that they happen on a regular basis and are similar in nature and have a limited scope change. From a strategy perspective, these projects are best managed as a program. They use similar contracting strategies. The path of construction related planning documents can be reused with only cosmetic changes, and the schedule can be reused with minor changes. These projects are executed and reported based on a best in class. As we go on to the Type 2, These projects are projects that happen on a frequent basis to the enterprise. They carry a medium risk in that they are a little out of the ordinary and can have a greater percentage of scope change. From a strategy perspective, these projects are best managed as a portfolio. When it comes to the contracting strategy, it may vary. The contracting strategy may be impacted by the category. So let's say we're doing a series of power plants in California and then in Arizona. Arizona will have different laws and regulations. So although they're going to be more similar in the potential geographic location of the project may affect the contracting strategy between the projects in the different states. The path of construction and related planning documents are used as starting points. Schedules are reused with modifications, and these projects are executed and reported based on a best in category. The type 3 projects are the one-off projects of the enterprise. They carry a high risk in that they are unfamiliar, though they are capable of executing them. From a strategy perspective, they are best managed as an individual project. The contracting strategy will need to be determined. The path of construction will need to be developed. The project packaging, plan, and schedule will all need to be developed from scratch. And these projects are executed and reported based on the project plan. So another key element in the strategies is another key element in the AWP scalable model is the strategies. The first strategy being a program, which would refer to a group of related or non-related projects that can consist of a program is a group of similar projects managed in a coordinated way to get the benefits and control not available from managing them individually. This means that in a program you'll have multiple projects which are either similar or related to each other. A portfolio strategy would refer to a group of related or non-related projects and consist of multiple programs or multiple projects. And then of course the last strategy is an individual project. We won't go into a lot. Lloyd has an excellent example in the housing industry. I'll kind of go over it, and if you guys want to ask some questions, Lloyd can go into the details. So let's look at 3 scenarios in the housing industry for a word picture, if you will. So if you look at a developer building 100 homes in a community or city where all the homes are similar in design, they're able to utilize the same contractors and the same materials. There's a lot of benefits in running it as a program. There's less conflict among the project houses. There's an optimal utilization of resources. The resource constraints are minimized, and there's a better communication and a coordination among the houses, or the projects, if you will. A custom home builder doing 2-story bungalows and or split level housing throughout a province or state are going to be dealing with different designs and different contractors, yet they're still going to find an optimal allocation of utilization of resources among the projects. They're going to provide a constant support to the houses or the projects throughout the province or state. They're going to find fewer conflicts and better communication among the projects, and better coordination among the projects as well. The third scenario would be a Timber Kings, a custom log home builder who builds homes all over the country, where each home is individually designed, pre-assembled, shipped, and then built on site. So the foundation of our scalable AWP model is the integrated flow chart. The integrated flow chart identifies the 3 stages and the deliverables for each stage, and so that is the basis going forward for the model. Our team deliverables for phase 1 that we'll be presenting in Houston is an owner contracting strategy recommendations and a project classification scheme. A path of construction guidance document with some examples. We've got some work package recommendations and some samples for that. We've got a project planning and execution deliverables for each stage clearly identified in an integrated advanced work packaging flowchart. And we've developed the scalable comprehensive work phase planning system. So our work plan is as shown. We've finishing up our phase 1 in Houston this October as we present our deliverables for this initial phase. As we leave the AWP conference in October and start into phase 2, our teams will continue to develop and review work products for types 2 and 3 projects. We'll be releasing the draft report in April of 2018 for all those in attendance at the AWP conference for a review, before formally releasing the report at the COAA's Best Practice Conference in May of 2018. We'll also begin our process of seeking out organizations to pilot the scalable model at this year's conference. Our goal is to be able to present some case studies at both the Houston and London conference in the fall of 2018. Phase 3 will be working with different organizations in developing the initial case studies and updating the report to reflect changes, both of which will be presented at the AWP conference in Houston and London in the fall of 2018. We'll determine path forward in relation to additional case studies. We'll be stopping and taking a breath to reevaluate what is done and what needs to get done. How does this apply to the mega projects within a project? I think that we have series of all types of these project categories, so how can we apply this model to them? And that is the end of this presentation, and we'll pass it over to Steve to address the questions and the answers.
Just before we do that, I just wanted to comment. We've had 4 teams actively working on this. We've had owners putting together thoughts on what the contracting strategy should be, reviewing documentation from the engineering and the construction groups. We've had the front-end construction team looking at how path of construction is developed and what should be in the construction plan. We've had the engineering team looking at how the engineering deliverables should be put together and the procurement deliverables. And we've set up a work phase planning group to review how WFP can be made more scalable, and they've come up with an entire system to do that. So I just wanted to give you a sense of where these people have come from. We've had representatives from all the major EPC companies, from small construction companies. We've had owners from both Canada and the United States, from the chemical industry, from the power industry, from the oil and gas industries. So there's a lot of talent that's been pulled in to do this, and I think I can safely say this is the largest committee that isn't safety-based that COAA's ever put together. And I think the reason we've been able to attract this talent is because this is an area that people are very interested in. So I'll toss it back to Steve, and you can open it up for Q&A.
Sure. We don't actually have any formal questions at this time. If anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to send it in on the questions pane, and I'll see it here and I can pass it on to the presenters. Alternatively, feel free to send us an email if you have a question after the fact, and we can connect with you that way. But there was one quick question in regards to the slide deck. Can you get a copy of it after the presentation? The recording itself will be available for sure. Lloyd and Ben, did you intend to distribute the slide deck itself or just the recording?
I think if anybody wants a copy of it, just send us an email and we'll be happy to make it available to you.
Okay. So if there's any other points or topics that you'd like to touch on, Lloyd and Ben, you can speak on that. We do have a comment or question here. What is the smallest project that AWP has been successfully implemented on that you know of?
Ben, you want to take that one?
I'll answer that. I think that one of my goals in a scalable model is to identify that if we're building anything, we're doing AWP. At the base core of AWP, we're providing information, material, and tools. And so the question becomes is how effective in the level of maturity is the organization building projects? Because my mantra is that if we're building anything anywhere in the world of any size, we're doing AWP on a principal perspective. The question now becomes is how standardized are our process, how consistently are we applying them throughout the organization, and where are we optimizing those processes? And that is really the goal and the purpose of the scalable model. We want optimization, we want increased productivity, but we can't get optimization until we get consistency, and we can't get consistency in the industry until we standardize how we do projects. And AWP is the best way to plan and execute projects. And so the scalable model is going to apply to any size of project. And the scalable model on the very low end is a valve replacement job that will run through the scalable AWP model is a $2 million value.
Yeah, and our company did work for a gold mine, and they had about a $2 million project that we applied the concepts to. The difference is it wasn't that we were doing it from the beginning, it was for project recovery, and we were able to successfully complete the project, which had pretty much completely gone off the rails. So, you know, the model is so new that we are still working on getting well-documented cases, but I've seen it used on projects down to $1 million or less.
Okay, here's another question. How do you measure consistently across projects when every project is a snowflake with different scope, contractors, and tools?
Do you mind if I take that one?
Go ahead, Lloyd. Go ahead.
So one of the things that we're strongly recommending is that you use a more data-based approach. So the organization creates a knowledge network internally and starts tracking and categorizing the projects. They evaluate which contracting strategies are working best for them, which contractors are working best. So we can start to reduce the variability in our snowflakes. They're all going to be different. Even our model indicates that for a type 1 project, there's going to be up to a 25% difference in scope. But if we can start to reduce that, we can start to see much better outcomes. And an example at a COAA conference a couple of years ago, Shell indicated that they had done a project, and they had another project that was virtually identical that was coming up. And what they decided to do was, instead of what they normally do, which is let's reinvent this, they said, we've got the engineering. Do we really need to make major changes, or do we just need to adjust it slightly? We've got a history of what our suppliers have done for us. Do we need to start over, or can we use that as our starting point? We have contractors that have worked for us, and for the ones that have given us great performance, why not use them again? So they attempted to replicate the project with minor changes, and they found that they got a 30% reduction in required labor. So that's a pretty significant improvement that they were able to obtain just by reusing a lot of the information, like the engineering, the path of construction, contracting strategy, and so on. So I think sometimes we try and make those snowflakes too different, and we can actually find ways to focus on the similarities and use a consistent approach rather than trying to reinvent the wheel every time.
Okay, maybe this is a good extension of that. How is contracting for AWP different for smaller projects or for a scalable AWP program?
Do you want to take that, or do you want me to, man?
I'll take a stab on it. You can add to it. I think what we find a lot in specifically the type 1 and the type 2 category projects for the owner is that they'll have those projects will fall into a smoke projects division, which will already have a predetermined vendor choice or a maintenance contractor.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that one of the things that we're finding is that 3 bids and a buy may not always be the best strategy. That on these smaller projects, going more relationship-based rather than transactional can actually result in better outcomes for the owner and greater improvements from project to project.
Good question.
Okay, so and then we have another question here. It's related to committee work. Do you have any examples of what the teams have identified to date as different practices? Sorry, I've just lost the text. Sorry. Do you have any examples of what the teams have identified to date as different practices between small and large projects, even when the AWP principles, or even though the AWP principles are the same?
So the one that we focused most on is the solar project, and a couple of things that we've learned that are quite beneficial, because this is based on actual projects being done by one of the companies who are participating in the team. When it comes to a project that's been done a number of times, you can actually start off with a path of construction that's fairly detailed, and you can get to a level 3 schedule much more quickly than you would be able to on a project that hasn't been done before. So we have actual examples that we'll be showing at the conference of path of construction development for the solar project, schedule development for the solar project, and those have resulted in some pretty significant improvements in productivity, safety, all the areas that we've talked about. I see that Kirk is on the line. Is there a way for us to give him the mic, Steve?
I think so. One sec.
Kirk, would you mind filling us in on what your committee has done specifically around path of construction and schedule?
If you can hear us, Kirk, feel free to speak. You've got the mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, just to add to the question, what we're seeing with the solar project example is the path of construction, depending on the client and the actual general arrangement, doesn't change very much. You can start the project planning early and duplicate previous project experiences and lessons learned. So you're making modifications to the schedule based off that project team's approach, but the activities and relationships doesn't change very much.
And what kind of benefits have, without going into too much detail, what kind of benefits have you seen by this approach of reusing information and on projects that are being executed as a program? Have there been improvements, and what kind of improvements have there been?
Yes, there have been significant improvements. We had several projects in 2016 that were very successful, but we had some safety challenges. And as we went into the next group of projects, we were able to take the lessons learned and the things that needed improvement, make some adjustments fairly that were very beneficial. And to date, on those projects, our safety record is substantially improved. In fact, recordable free on the groups, and seeing some fairly good improvement on productivity. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we're definitely seeing improvements, as well as improvements with the suppliers providing the design and material.
So, Steve, do you have some other questions?
At this time, we just have some comments that I can pass on to the panelists after the presentation is closed. But I think that's all the questions for now.
So I've got something for the audience. If you look at applying these principles, then what you're going to see is, if they're successful, the owners are going to reap some pretty significant benefits. But the question is, what about the contractors? If I'm a contractor, and let's say I'm providing construction support, and on a project that's $100 million, I do achieve that 25% improvement in labor productivity, and I get savings for the owner of $25 million. What does that do to the contractor? And do we need to, does the owner community need to determine how to incentivize the contractors so that they are made whole? In other words, if we save that money, that's obviously going out of the pockets of the contractors. How can we incentivize them to share some of the savings with the contractors? Is that a good idea? I'm be interested to see what your thoughts are. So can you let us know what you think about that? And that may trigger a question or two. So Steve, are you getting any chats from that?
I've had one comment so far. It just says more competitive on the next bid. If anyone wants to comment, you can send it to us through the questions. We've got competitive advantage. A question. Well, I've got another question here, Lloyd. I'm not sure if it's related to your theme or not.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Execution of IWPs depends on timely availability of information, materials, equipment, and labor. Which are late most often?
Just based on my personal experience, I would say that engineering and materials are probably two of the greater challenge areas on most projects. The equipment and labor can be challenges, but they're usually not as bad as engineering and materials. Ben, would you agree with that? You're muted, Ben.
Thanks. Yeah, I would agree. I would refer to the report that Bob McDagg and George Jurgis did on mega projects and identify the 208 roadblocks. The majority of all of those roadblocks referred to material.
And we have a comment from someone that echoes that. They're saying materials, sometimes even if on a site. For a simple project, generally materials. More complex projects, generally engineering is this later. So to get back to your question from your previous question, Lloyd, in response to your question, someone recommends the owner to have a sharing arrangement on gains from implementation of AWP and achieving the set productivity. In my experience, we used a 60 owner to 40 contractor split in savings achieved.
So just want to throw something out to you. If a contractor were to do $10 million less work, that's a $10 million savings for the owner, but the contractor would actually only see the profit margin based on that $10 million. And if that profit margin was 6%, then they'd be saving about, or they'd be losing about $600,000 in profit. So to make them whole, all you would have to do is incentivize them to replace the profit that they were losing. Just wondering what people think about that concept. We have clients that are actually struggling with this right now. So this is some of the issues that are working their way through the industry as we speak.
And one comment that also came into your question, Lloyd, was that as an owner, this person has done that on very few projects for cost saving. Just don't see it that often, they say.
Yep, and I would agree with that. One thing I will put out there is we are looking for additional help, especially from the owner community. So if any of you are interested in participating in our committee, please send me an email. We'd love to talk to you.
So we've got, let me see here, I think we have a response to your question, Lloyd. It's a bit, oh, a few have come in. Okay, the challenge with this response: how many contractors are 40% more productive, one contractor versus another? This is a challenge to justify as it gets into who actually generated the cost savings. Is it a cost savings, avoidance, or scope deletion from an owner?
Those are all excellent comments and all things that I think we are struggling with. Some of the contractors have been working very hard to build their expertise in AWP, but it's very rare that, unless it's a full EPC situation, it's very rare that one organization has full control. Even in an EPC, we've got vendors we're dependent on, we've got owners we're dependent on, and any system that we develop has to take all of those complexities into account. So we don't have the answer, but we are definitely looking for input to help develop some recommendations in our final report. And if this is an area that you're interested in, we'd love to hear from you.
So another comment, the highest profit margin I have heard from contractors is 20%. So for 10 million in savings, best a contractor can do is 2 million. So with the 60-40 split, the contractor gets a 4 million incentive to save the money, hence making it a win-win situation. I still believe that setting up a sharing formula will provide the right incentives for the contractor to go after the savings.
Yeah, I agree that there's got to be a solution that will benefit the owner and benefit the contractors and other vendors. We're just in the process of trying to figure out what that's going to look like.
Did you want to tackle one more question before we wrap?
Sure.
Okay. Do you think that AWP can be implemented at scale through incentives to contractors without the owners forcing the issue, or is it up to the owners to collectively decide that AWP is how projects will be executed and require contractors to adapt?
We're already seeing that. There are a number of contractors that are making it a bid requirement to spell out what your AWP plan is, and effectively, if you don't have one, you get eliminated at the first stage of the bid process. So I think as owners see value in this process and start requiring their contractors to use it, it just becomes the same as safety. If you don't have a great safety record, then don't bother bidding for our jobs because you won't get it. I think it's moving in that direction with AWP. We're just not nearly as far along as we are with safety. Ben, any additional thoughts?
No, that's good. I got nothing to add to that.
Okay, so if you want, Lloyd, I'll just leave it on the this phases slide here to give everyone a reminder of the next steps for the committee, and leave it to you to wrap.
Okay, so a couple of things. One, if you take a look, you will see that there is a handout in your control panel, and that handout is actually the conference lookbook. It indicates who's going to be at the conference, what presentations there are going to be. We have a number of owner presentations. We have 5 of the biggest EPC companies in the world speaking at the conference. And I think this year we've got probably more stories about what works and what doesn't. And based on the audience that we have, I think there's a lot of opportunity for networking to get more information. So the lookbook will give you more information on the conference. Steve, what's the easiest way for people on the webinar to send us messages once the webinar is over?
I'd recommend just sending an email. We're going to be sending you basically a follow-up email with a link to the recorded webinar, and you can reply directly to that message if you have questions or comments.
Great. So again, the conference is on the 10th and 11th in Houston. We're hoping to see you there, and thank you very much for taking the time to sit on the webinar today. We'll let you go.
Thank you.